I'm not hearing it at all.
Because why? Say again, please. Battleground for arguably the greatest anti-LGBTQ assault ever seen. Passage of Don't Say Gay and Stop Woke Act in this Florida legislative session created a blueprint of what will be next in Florida for the LGBTQ community, and a blueprint that will be exported to states across America by radical voices. So this evening at Queer News Tonight, we will explore this hateful Florida legislative session, why it's happening, and most important of all, what's next. The Happening Out Television Network has assembled a dream team for LGBTQ civil rights, and we are going to help all of us understand what we are watching in Florida. Joining us will be Stephen Gaskill, president of the Florida LGBTQ+ Democratic Caucus, FayWhat, a leading lesbian activist and host of the FayWhat show, and Stephen's jealous that I didn't say his last name that way. Nathan Bruemmer, well-known trans activist and the LGBTQ+ statewide advocate for Nikki Fried's office of the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs. Senator Shevrin Jones, Florida's first LGBTQ+ senator. Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, Florida's first LGBTQ+ Latino state representative. Representative Michelle Rayner, Florida's first LGBTQ+ lesbian woman of color state representative, and Representative Angie Nixon, one of Florida's leading LGBTQ+ straight allies. From a parent's perspective, we have Todd Delmay, president of the Hollywood LGBTQ Council, with his husband and child. They were the principal plaintiffs of Florida's marriage equality lawsuit that led to marriage equality in our state. From a student's perspective, Max Fenning, president of the youth organization PRISM and a well-known member of LGBTQ+ student protests in Tallahassee during this latest Florida legislative session. With national and international news almost unlike anything we have seen before about the LGBTQ+ community, front and center, we are going to explore literally what the hell is happening in Florida. All next, live on Queer News Tonight. You're running the 60.
This is the world's first live daily LGBTQ evening news show, literally out of the closet and into the headlines on Queer News Tonight with Al Ferguson.
Well, good evening, and I am anchor Al Ferguson. Welcome to the special live broadcast of Queer News Tonight. This evening, we live up to our motto, literally, out of the closet and into the headlines. Watch us in broadcast television at Roku, Apple Television, and more. Now let's examine Florida's completed legislative session. It began on January 11, 2022, and was scheduled to end March 14th. But more important than the 63 days was what occurred during the session itself. For the LGBTQ+ community, Governor Ron DeSantis and the conservative GOP majority created a culture war attack not seen since the days of the orange juice queen, Anita Bryant's attempt to say that Florida must protect parental rights and children's safety against the menace of gay people. To talk about it, let's meet Queer News Tonight host for this evening, Wednesday, March 30th, 2022. First up is one of Florida's most notable members of the L in our LGBTQ+ community, FayWhat. As a lesbian, she has the world's first morning news talk show called The FayWhat Show on Mondays at 9 a.m. Good evening, Faye.
Good evening, everyone. So happy to be at this table with all these incredible people. Super excited about this. These conversations need to be had.
Yeah. Next is Stephen Gaskill. He is one of the state's strongest political voices as president of the Florida LGBTQ+ Democratic Caucus. With more than 20 county caucus organizations, the Florida LGBTQ+ Democratic Caucus leads the fight for more representation for the Florida LGBTQ community. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Al. Great to have us. Great to be here, and thanks for hosting this important program.
It's going to be great. Next is renowned trans activist Nathan Bruemmer. He has led the Florida T in our LGBTQ+ community for nearly his entire life, and also serves as the residents of Florida as the LGBTQ+ liaison representative for Nikki Freed, the Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Affairs. Welcome, Nathan.
Great to be here. Thanks, Al.
In just a few minutes, we're going to introduce LGBTQ+, the first LGBTQ+ senator in Florida history, Senator Shevrin Jones, representing South Florida in the Florida Senate. He was at the state, national, and international forefront of the fight against Don't Say Gay, CRT, and Stop Woke Act. And we want to show you something that Senator Jones said. Watch this.
After taking 30 years of just wanting to make him and my mom proud, I never knew that living my truth would cause church members to leave my dad's church or friends to stop talking to me.
Senator Jones, your dad is very proud of you.
He certainly is. And we'll have Senator Jones with us at our table in just a few moments. So let's jump right in. Here's where we are in Florida as the LGBTQ+ community after the 2022 Florida legislative session. These seem to be facts. Let's see. I believe these are facts. There was not an issue of gay gender or identity being a focus in K to 3rd grade. There was not critical race education being taught in our schools. But that did not stop Governor Ron DeSantis and radical conservatives to create solutions to problems that did not exist. In the name of parental rights and protecting children against LGBTQ, they introduced Don't Say Gay, the Stop Woke Act, discussed anti-LGBTQ health bills, and more. Disney at first did not weigh in. Then Disney was protested. Now Disney has declared war on anti-LGBTQ legislation in Florida. DeSantis declares Disney as woke. And now everyone from European capitals, the U.S. business community, media outlets, and even the Oscars have made Florida a national laughingstock. Finally, even DeSantis' press secretary weighed in by suggesting that if you opposed Don't Say Gay, you were really a groomer, and that is code for being a pedophile against Florida's children. So let's start with the big picture. Let's examine the legislative session itself and discover what the hell is going on in Tallahassee. Anybody got a simple answer to that question?
Well, the short version is it's horrific, it's brutal, it makes no sense, it doesn't match where people are, where Floridians are. This is a legislature and a governor that's focused on legislating to a very small and shrinking white, straight Christian minority in the country, because that's the base, but unfortunately that's the base that gets them elected, and that's what this session was all about.
Do you agree with that, Nathan?
I do. I think about how we serve our community outside of those, what should have been 60 days. They extended because they weren't able to accomplish the one priority, which is a budget within that time frame. So as a representative of a state agency, one of the biggest things we can do is build trust and serve our community, all Floridians. And this makes it incredibly difficult to do that because it's out of touch with really what our state and what our communities want and need, frankly.
First thoughts, Faye?
Madness. Madness. That's what I think is going on there. I feel like we're being erased. I feel like we're slowly being erased. And, you know, those voiceless people, their voices are getting lower and more silent. It's heartbreaking.
This attempt in this legislative session, as I open the show for Queer News Tonight, suggests that this is an attack unlike probably anything that we've seen in our lifetimes. I remember, for the sake of discussion, I'll be the only one that remembers Anita Bryant. Wink, wink, Stephen. But even since those days, we didn't see anything like this. I mean, this is national and international news. Every side possible is weighing in. We're going to discuss Disney and what Disney did and didn't do, et cetera. When we look at this legislative session of the 63 days, was it designed to get people elected? Is this the way that Governor DeSantis is going to be forever remembered, as launching his presidential campaign in 2024? And even if he loses, perhaps 2028, is that what's going on here? Or is this just purely hate for the sake of hate?
I think it's a little bit of both. They win by, to misquote a misquote of George W. Bush, by making the pie smaller. They are legislating very specific positions targeted at very specific constituencies because they can. And that was a line from Representative Fine last session. Why are you doing this? Because we can. This is virtue signaling on behalf of the governor and the legislature right behind it. Florida's Republican legislature would love to see Ron DeSantis as president. It would be good for them, and that's what this session is all about. But again, there's no overwhelming support for all of these bills, whatever they are, except among their very specific small constituencies.
When you say that, does that mean that ultimately they will be successful at what they're trying to do, or they will not be successful?
Well, you know, there's lots of litigation coming, and I think others can speak better to that than I can. You know, in the public perception, I think that's where a lot of these cases are won or lost. I think certainly with Don't Say Gay, that has been one of the few cases where our side, the Democratic side, the side of right actually, was able to frame the issue, frame the message, and create a groundswell of support, not just here in Florida, but around the country, as you said. But with other bills, that's tougher.
Well, let's talk about the other big bill. We're gonna get into the specifics of it. So let's talk about it from a legislative session standpoint. Other attempts in terms of woke, critical race theory, trans health, et cetera. The goal seems to be broad and broader than what we first we thought. Nathan, you've watched from your seat as a leading trans activist, the trans community be targeted left and right by the state of Florida. But this seems to go well beyond just targeting trans. Well, first off, and as it relates to trans, how do you think the trans community survived the 63 days of legislative session?
Yeah, so Al, I checked in with a lot of community members on Monday after the signing in Pasco County. And folks are hurting. There were a lot of community members that turned the channel in listening to the governor and other speakers' remarks that day. The same happened during session, whether it was at committee hearings or on the House or Senate floor. There were things said. You know, I respect very much the position that I have been privileged to hold. As a Floridian, born and raised, I've been educated in this state. The trust placed in us as public servants in whatever role we have is phenomenal. And there were gut punches day after day, week after week, and with some communication. And there were offers made by the students that came to meet, to talk, to educate, to have folks get to know them as constituents. And bill sponsors weren't willing to meet with them, unfortunately. And that part's heartbreaking. But we are absolutely an amazingly resilient community, and we're supporting one another right now. But a lot of folks are healing.
You know, a lot of people that I check in certainly in the last month. I mean, in Queer News Tonight, this has been obviously a dominant story. Queer News Tonight is not only followed in South Florida and Florida, but around the nation and really English-speaking world. We continue to report on what's going on in Florida, and I have to say that in general, I feel a lot of apathy in our community. That contrary to the observation that you made as an activist, I'm an activist, but not in the way that you are or the way you are. that the LGBTQ community, or large portions of it, didn't come in the complete ways that we think that they should to change this. If we're going to change judges, we have to elect officials. If we are going to elect officials, we have to turn out at the voting polls. If we're going to turn out at voting polls, we have to register. What do you think about that? That we're not, as a community, doing enough to fight what we just watched in this legislative session?
Well, I think most marginalized members of the LGBTQ community feel that way. Women have felt that. Black and brown community members feel that way. Trans folks feel that way, without question. This session collectively highlighted all of the issues we are all confronting. And I will say consistently, as someone that does education and outreach, our agency is the lead consumer protection agency. What we're trying to prevent is fraud and discrimination. It is really hard to do that when we don't connect with community members. I think collectively we saw voices come together in protest in communities or in Tallahassee to let their voices be heard in a way that I've never seen before. So while I say there's education to do, I also saw collectiveness that I don't know that I've ever seen in Florida. I mean,
and Stephen, to the point with you, you represent the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus, so you're really the tip of the sword in terms of trying to galvanize the Florida LGBTQ community to get out and make a difference. What do you think about this, that maybe our community is not doing enough to respond to what we saw at this legislative session?
Sure. We know that's always a challenge, is how you keep the momentum going, how you keep the energy up. And look, we've just come through 4 years of Trump, 2 years of COVID. Everyone's exhausted. And you hate to say that, but that is just the reality. Part of the challenge, I think, is our community is now engaged because now they see what's on the line. They see what's at stake. They see this as 2 sessions in a row where we're under fire. And what gives me more hope than anything else there, quite frankly, Al, is looking at not only our community, but also some of our allies, particularly the young people. The young people were incredibly active in the 2018 election, which we came closer than we ever had in a lot of elections that year. We actually won the statewide race for the first time in a dozen years. And they're coming out now. They're coming out in support. They're coming out of the schools. They're marching. They are driving this. And I think we've tapped into them as a resource because they're either with us, they're a part of our community, or they're allies. And they see this as a civil rights issue that it really is. That's what gives me hope about this session, this election, and where we go from here.
And Faye, I want to fold you in from the standpoint of being a woman. You were at Tampa Pride last weekend.
80,000 strong.
Yeah, it was an amazing event. I watched lots of the stuff related to it. Nikki Fried, our Secretary of Agriculture, the only cabinet post to ever have appointed an LGBT representation for a cabinet post, of which Nathan represents. She was very clear in Tampa last weekend of trying to summarize what she watched in the legislative session to basically say they're trying to other us, and that they're creating a process of creating an enemy that is other than us. And de facto, I believe, without putting any words in Commissioner Fried's mouth, she was trying to say that it is basically older white men that are creating boogeymen. And the boogeymen in this instance are LGBTQ people. When you were in Tampa, what did you think about what Nikki Fried
I love Nikki Fried, by the way. She's just an exceptional human being. You know, all this stuff is scary when it comes to being a woman. I mean, we've had to deal with these kind of marginalized situations for many, many moons. I have to think about Women's International Month, which was last month, where, initially all the history was written by old white men, and women were part of that history. And we had to riot and scream very bloody murder to be acknowledged and to be given that month. I feel that we're at that same crossroads when it comes to LGBTQ. We've got to be louder. We've got to do more. We're not doing enough. The reality is that when I'm posting something about don't say gay, and I have LGBTQ friends inboxing me, not knowing what the hell we're talking about, is surprising. There's a lot of people that until their marriage rights are completely taken away from under them, that they will not be standing with us to fight this fight.
Wow. Well, as we start, we're just rolling into this in terms of trying to summarize what we've watched in the 63 days of this legislative session in Florida, because as we begin, this is what the state is setting up. They're setting up what's going to happen in November. They're setting up what's going to happen in the next number of years leading into the 24 presidential rotation. And unfortunately, for all of you that are not in the state of Florida and you make the jokes, gosh, I'm so glad I don't live in Florida. Oh, wait, they're coming for you.
You're next.
Too.
You're
just
next.
That's all it is, because it's a plan. It seems to be a plan. We reported yesterday at Queer News Tonight that 15 additional states now have very, very similar laws to Don't Say Gay. And they're being cranked out on the old-fashioned mimeograph machine and said, just insert state name here and initiate your new law. Well, let's move beyond just the broad discussion of the legislative session and get into some of the very specifics. Let's discuss the major pieces of legislation that were propelled against the LGBTQ community during this Florida legislative session. We are joined by some of the top voices in the fight against what we all watched, and we'll continue to rotate everyone in as we have them, but I'm going to do the introduction. Joining our guest dream team is Florida's first Latino LGBTQ state representative. Before I do that full introduction, watch this.
This law does not solve any problems that currently exist. Instead, House Bill 1557 has been weaponized by the governor's office to launch a bigoted smear campaign.
Well, somebody I watched closely in these 63 days of legislative session from Central Florida, my own home ground at the University of Central Florida, is Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith. And I'm not sure he's with us. Oh, he is. There you are. Representative Smith. Thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. And welcome.
Thank you for having me, Al.
Yeah, we're going.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Everything's great. Let me add some of our dream team members along with us. I'm going to production. I'm going to fold Senator Shevrin Jones back in. He's been able to join us now, and he is actually in studio. And Senator Jones, your camera's right there in front of you, straight ahead. And have you done MSNBC or CNN lately? Welcome to Queer News Tonight. Our hometown first ever LGBTQ state senator, and we're going to fold Senator Jones in a moment. And we continue with more of our dream team, and this is Florida's first lesbian woman of color, LGBTQ plus state representative. Let us show you a little of this. Watch this.
Thinking about the children, especially Black and brown children, who are going to be the hardest hit by this bill. We understand that in our communities, we're still dealing with the idea of sexuality and gender orientation, or sexual orientation rather, and gender identity.
As soon as we have Representative Michelle Rayner, we'll fold her into the conversation. Oh, we have Michelle. I know we have a time crunch. Good evening, Representative Rayner. And going to continue, finally, the LGBTQ plus community's dream team needs allies. And we don't talk about this nearly enough, do we? Watch this.
It's very frustrating, and it's super hard to be in this chamber and to be cool with people and cordial with people who are making policies that are detrimental to our communities.
Well, of course, straight ally in the State House is State Representative Angie Nixon. And Senator Nixon, good evening and welcome to Queer News Tonight. For everybody that is with us now, we're going to have an open conversation. Let's discuss Don't Say Gay. It was one of the principal pieces from this legislative session. The vague law bans discussion from K to third grade for simple things like, I have two mommies. But you can't talk about that now. But it's okay to talk about mommy and daddy. Seems like a contradiction. Then the state gets to decide for all other grades and schools what is appropriate. in discussion of gender and sexual identity. And that is a key piece that is being missed in conversation about this dangerous new law. It's called a slippery slope. And this morning, Raven-Symoné had an amazing demonstration at her television show and a walk-off by saying it was all about fairness. So she said, don't say straight. Watch what happened.
Governor DeSantis signed what some call the Don't Say Gay law. And Raven-Symoné and her fellow castmates decided to walk out.
Yeah.
You walked out there. You've since returned to work. But why was it so important for you and your castmates to do that?
Well, I am a part of the LGBTQ plus community. We have a lot of diversity on our set as well. And I'm going to say this, and this is my thing. If there's a don't say gay bill, there should be a don't say straight bill because it's not fair. And there are multiple kinds of humans in this world. And you are ruining the psyche, the confidence of so many young children because you are discrediting their parents, the people they love, the people that raise them, the people that teach them the manners when they walk into that schoolroom. So if you're not going to honor their family, your family shouldn't be honored either. So let's just make it even/equal, maybe.
We should point out we did reach out to the Walt Disney Company for comment. Haven't heard back, but after the bill was signed into law Monday, the company did release a statement, as you know, and that statement does read in part. We put it on our screen here. Our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed by the legislature or struck down in the courts, and we remain committed to supporting the national and state organizations working to achieve that.
Well, there it is, the signature piece in this 63-day legislative session, Don't Say Gay. Open participation for everyone. We'll just be polite with each other as we all have probably lots to say. Where are we on Don't Say Gay now?
I love Raven-Symoné. I love her, and she's just an incredible activist. She's a great actor. I've been watching her since I was a kid, and you know, just watching her say what we all know in our community. You know, she hit the nail right on the head. Like straight people will say, oh, why don't we have a straight pride? Because straight pride is every day. That's why we don't have a straight pride. You know, so I loved her comments. I think they were just spot on.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now with the culture wars that's happening across the country, I think Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith said this on the news not too long ago, is that the Republicans know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what the trigger points are right now because they are trying to use tactics that have been used in other states and figure, you know what, if it worked there, it could work here. And Governor DeSantis is extremely clear on this national agenda in which he has touted, not just in the state of Florida, but also across the country, of what he wanted to do, not just with Stop the Woke, but right here. And this wasn't the first year it started. It actually started last year with the Trans and Athletic Sports bill. And this is a continuation of that. And I'll end with this, that the Republicans said the quiet part out loud behind the scenes and why they were doing this. When we were trying to do the amendment, it was told to us that the bill sponsor of the abortion bill, who was Senator, I can't even think of her name right now, but the senator who put forth that bill, she made it clear that her goal was to begin to eliminate the transgender conversations that's happening in communities and in schools. And so they knew exactly what they're doing. Starja. Senator Starja.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other observations about where we are?
Well, I'll just, Representative Rayner, you go first.
Okay, no, well, thank you, Rev. You know, I would say, listen, you know, I think where we're at is just, it's a huge inflection point. I think all of us on this panel who are elected are running for some type of reelection or elected or running for new office. And, you know, I had someone ask my team, you know, I love Rep. Rayner. She's amazing, but why does she always talk about the gay stuff? And I think, you know, when I really begin to think about that question, and I've been saying this, you know, people want me to talk about the kitchen table issues such as the housing crisis that we're in, the homeowners insurance crisis that we're in, the environmental health crisis that we're in. But we're starting at a premise with a governor and a Republican legislature that says that LGBTQ lives don't matter, that Black lives don't matter. So I can't get you to care about housing and to want to make sure that I and other folks in our community have affordable and safe housing if the premise is that my life doesn't matter. If the premise is how I show up, how my family is constructed, how I live my life, I don't matter. Because if I don't matter, you don't care if I have safe housing. If I don't matter, you don't care that there are food deserts in my neighborhood. If I don't matter, you don't care that there are significant pollution issues in our communities. So really, we are seeing literally on display in government in a very audacious way that our leaders, the elected leaders of the governor of 22 million people in the state of Florida, he's literally saying LGBTQ lives don't matter, women's lives don't matter, Black folks' lives don't matter. The only lives that matter are if you love like him, look like him, think like him, and have the financial wherewithal that he does.
Representative Rayner, I want to follow up to your observation loud and clear. We said at the top of the show, sometimes I get the knock that in the LGBTQ community, I'm the privileged older white guy. And I accept that label proudly and then say, okay, but this is how we break the stereotypes that reflect that. To the challenge that you just said in terms of older white men in Florida and other places that don't respect the lives that matter of LGBT and of color, how do we expand the base of having more people hear that observation and join us to say, well, they absolutely do matter? How do we accomplish that? What's your suggestion of what we should be saying and doing?
I mean, I think that when we think about how to accomplish that, first off, I want to kind of talk to folks who are of our community who want to do better, who want to actually change things. Here's the deal. We have to move from being allies to accomplices. Allies are, folks that will put, something on Twitter, they'll put something on social media, but accomplices are people that will have some skin in the game. Whether you're having conversations at your dinner table, whether you are marching with us, whether you are using your privilege, whatever that may look like, to actually further equity and equality. And one of the things that I have noticed, and I'm going to be honest, we're all family. Angie is a straight ally, so she's our cousin. But I'm going to even talk about even in our own community, how there is specifically with we have to deal with our own stuff with racism and bias in our own LGBTQ community. We see it with when it comes to people of color who are in our community. I've heard, folks who are gay men say horrendous things about trans people. So we got to start in our house as well. And we got to make sure that we are doing the work in our house. And then we also have to make sure that we're not just fighting for one person, but we're fighting for all of us in the LGBTQ community and making sure that whatever privilege we may have in this community, that we're using that privilege to make sure all of our siblings are taken care of and protected.
Yeah, don't throw rocks at glass houses, and that starts in our own glass house. Loud and clear, you are heard. And Representative Guillermo Smith, your thoughts about Don't Say Gay and what we've seen in this legislative session?
My goodness, Al, where do I start? First of all, thank you for having me on, and it's really awesome to be on here with this power panel, especially with champions from the legislature as well, and one of our not allies but accomplices, Angie Nixon. So again, where to begin with Don't Say Gay? So let's just contextualize this. So when DeSantis signed this bill into law this week, he made Florida the first state in 20 years to pass a law that attempts to censor the LGBTQ community in our schools. Why is it the first time in more than 20 years, or in about 20 years? It's because we have seen a lot of progress over these last couple of decades. So what is it that we're seeing now? What we're seeing now is we're seeing a retrogression of that progress, and we are seeing cynical politicians like Governor Ron DeSantis and others. But to be fair, this was not his original idea. This was the original idea of Republican lawmakers in the legislature, which he exploited. before he used LGBTQ children as pawns, but he also made other children pawns as well, who were a part of his press conference earlier this week. And most of those children had no idea what they were none of them knew anything about what they were participating in. And I'd be curious to see what those conversations sounds like when they become adults with their parents. Why was I put in this place, used as a pawn by the governor of our state to sign this hateful bill? But the reality is that it's not just this regular attack on LGBTQ people. We lived through the Trump years. This is what Stephen was saying earlier. There's a bit of fatigue with the constant attacks against our community that you can be numb to it. What we're seeing is they are reviving the oldest anti-LGBTQ tropes that exist. The governor started the press conference to sign the Don't Say Gay bill into law with a sign and a poster that said, "Protect children." This is the same messaging. This is the same hurtful, dangerous message that was used by Anita Bryant to try to repeal the human rights ordinance in Miami-Dade County, which she said was actually going to put our children in danger, because if we enact protections for LGBTQ people in the workplace, that means that gay teachers are going to get close to our children, and we must protect our children. This is the same dangerous rhetoric that is now, they're trying to normalize it. We used to be called groomers by the darkest places on the internet, by the anonymous trolls who basically would come out of nowhere. You would hear these comments every so often. Then it started being associated with QAnon, and we're like, well, these people are obviously unhinged. We must, you can't really put too much credence into what they're saying. Now, after the governor's press secretary and his office has launched these attacks saying that it's not the Don't Say Gay bill, it's actually the anti-groomer bill. And if you don't agree with us, you're either an enabler of pedophiles and groomers, or you yourself are a groomer or a pedophile. Al, every single morning I wake up, and I am very sure that many folks who are on this panel have the same experience. It does not matter what I post about on social media. It can be something totally unrelated, and I am bombarded with baseless accusations of pedophilia that, by the way, are borderline libelous. They are smearing the entire LGBTQ community. And yes, did they characterize all opponents of the Don't Say Gay bill as groomers or enablers of pedophilia? Yes, but they have been particularly intent on making sure that those LGBTQ individuals and lawmakers who are opposed are basically characterized and smeared as groomers themselves, which is very dangerous, and it is something that often takes the form of violence against our community, because people believe these tropes and they're being promoted on the daily. And it's just the perfect example of how the text of the bill was bad enough. The prohibition on the inclusion of LGBTQ people in the classroom was bad enough. But now we have seen, before the bill was even signed into law, Al, that the Don't Say Gay bill has been used as a vehicle to push even more homophobia and transphobia in a way that's dangerous.
Yeah, and to provide some echo, Representative Guillermo Smith, of what you just said, I invite our audience. This week there is an incredible op-ed in the Washington Post. And in the op-ed in the Washington Post, it discusses the history of racism and LGBT homophobia in the state of Florida over the last 70 years, since the 1950s, and comes to the conclusion of showing example after example of, in the name of protecting of parental rights, in protecting our children from pedophiles, how we have come repeatedly to these same conclusions. And unfortunately for For the trolls that fight Queer News Tonight, we happen to believe in science and history. So we come back to the facts over and over. I invite everybody to watch or to read that op-ed in the Washington Post, which was written, by the way, by anchor Dr. Julio Capo and some senator down in South Florida, Senator Shevrin Jones, I believe was his name. I'm not quite sure. Make sure you read it, because it is quite an interesting read to support what Representative Guillermo Smith just said. And
I read it, Senator. Good job.
I want to come to Representative Angie Smith, or I'm sorry, Angie Nixon, for a moment. In talking about what's happening with Don't Say Gay, you have a very unique perspective, because you can't be labeled with the troll attack that Representative Guillermo Smith just provided, because you are a straight ally in the State House. What's your assessment of what we're watching over Don't Say Gay? Oh, Angie, I think we have you in mute, perhaps?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Louder? Can you hear me?
Yes, and a little more sound, and I think we're all set. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
First of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be on this great panel. Thank you for having me. My assessment of what's happening is we have a politically ambitious governor who simply wants to be the next president of the United States, and he is attacking communities that he feels stand in the way of potentially becoming president. I'm very disgusted and disturbed by what he's doing right now. And as a Black woman, how could I sit around and be quiet when my friends, which are members of the LGBTQ community, are being attacked, especially knowing what my ancestors had to go through, what my grandmother and my mom had to go through regarding civil rights. And so I wanted to stand and not just be an ally, but to be an accomplice. And similar to what Rep. Rayner stated earlier, having to really push back in my community. You know, Black people oftentimes come from Christian, down home, especially in Florida, down home, Southern Christian Bible Belt, evangelistic holiness type stuff. And so even my father, and I told these folks in a text message, even my father pushed back and kind of disowned me for standing out and speaking in support of members of the LGBT community. But first of all, who am I to judge? And I damn sure, I'm sorry, I don't know if I can cuss, but I'm damn sure gonna stand up and love them, because, you know, they've been here with us in our struggles, and I want to be here for them as well.
We have, you'll notice, a lot of diversity sitting in this panel, this dream team that we're assessing the Florida session. And in addition to Don't Say Gay, another major piece of legislation has gone through. The governor, I do not believe, has signed it yet, but has cleared both the House and the Senate. So let's continue this conversation about the Florida legislative session. Why does Governor DeSantis and Tucker Carlson's head seem to explode over CRT? But they certainly do. It's clear that it is a vital culture war issue as the legislature passes the Stop Woke Act. Where are we on Stop Woke, and what is y'all's assessment of what we watch there, in addition to Don't Say Gay, this? Who would like to weigh in on being woke?
I will.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Rep.
I spoke about earlier to some educators, and so, you know, I'll say it. We have a homophobic, racist governor, who, as Stephen stated, is a part of a white, straight, uber religious minority that is shrinking, and they are afraid to lose power. They realize that they are outnumbered by Black and brown people, and they are afraid that we're going to do what they did to us if we become in power. And so they're doing things at all costs to erase our history. They are enhancing penalties. They passed a bill recently which would allow youth to remain incarcerated, I believe, without even being, without the, y'all cleared up, Michelle knows, Rayner knows.
Without bail an indefinite period of time.
And so it's an all-out attack to keep power and control, right? When you're making more money off the backs of our people and our children when they're incarcerated, as opposed to educating them, so that again you can stay in power and in office, you're gonna do things at all costs to do that. And that's what we're seeing. CRT is not being taught in K through 12 schools, but now we're allowing a radicalized fringe group like the Moms of Liberty to potentially ban books like Ruby Bridges, the biography of Martin Luther King. The governor even put a non-experienced person in the field of education who is a member of the Moms of Liberty on the board of education. Why? Because he's playing to a base of folks, because he wants to run for president. Like, let's be clear. These are all politically ambitious motivations, and we have to stop him in his tracks come November, or this country as a whole is going to experience the foolery that we have experienced in the state of Florida.
Can I just add to what Representative Nixon said? She was being very kind when she said Governor DeSantis appointed a non-educated person to the Board of Education. What he actually did was he appointed a Moms for Liberty leader who is a QAnon supporter to the State Board of Education. The same State Board of Education, by the way, that is going to be deciding, according to the Don't Say Gay bill, what is and is not age-appropriate classroom inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity. You remember those lines in the bill? In accordance with state standards, beyond grades K through 3, inappropriate or developmentally appropriate conversations and instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity. State standards are set by the State Department of Education, which now has a QAnon representative on there. Why was she appointed? Well, she's the wife of Republican State Representative Cord Bird. And I say Cord with a Q. Yes, I'm going to be petty for a minute. But these are the folks who are in charge. And this is the reason why the Don't Say Gay bill, one of the reasons why it was so scary. This is an agenda of censorship and surveillance. You have Stop Woke. Stop Woke is about stopping and regulating and surveilling the teaching of history, the teaching of Black history in particular in our schools and in the workplace. You have the censorship of LGBTQ people through Don't Say Gay. You had the governor at one point openly supporting putting video cameras in classrooms in our schools to surveil teachers to make sure that they were complying with state standards. Thank goodness that bill didn't pass. But this is the stuff of authoritarian regimes. While he was stopping wokeness, the governor should have been stopping rising property insurance rates. He should have been addressing access to housing affordability. He should have been addressing the teacher shortage crisis, which, by the way, is made worse now because teachers are wanting to leave the classroom because of Stop Woke. They're wanting to leave the classroom because of Don't Say Gay, and they fear it's getting worse.
You know, can I ask everyone involved in our conversation? What I hear on those two observations is intersectionality or intersectional observation between lots of diversity. I hear much in the LGBTQ community, especially among gay white males, that we got marriage in 2015. We're good. Everything's fine. And what I'm hearing in this observation is that there is a lot going on here. Look at the diversity of these faces. Men, women, trans, brown, black, white. The attempts of both of these laws, of woke and don't say gay, it seems like that there is an intersection going on and that there is common unity between black, brown, and LGBT, and women and men and trans, in that we have a common foe. Why are we not organizing from the standpoint of recognizing that need to unite, and it's not uniting us? Why is that not seeming to happen in the way we would want it to?
I'm going to address this, and then y'all know I have to drop off, Stephen. Al, I think they may have told you I have to drop off. Yeah. I think that your question is well taken, and I think that, you know, we have to, and I kind of alluded to it earlier when we were talking, you know, we have to come together. And I always say, if there is, you know, injustice against Black folks, the train for LGBT folks is not going to be late. So we have to realize, and much to what Representative Nixon was saying, that our journeys are intertwined, and that we have to make sure, just as hard as we're fighting for LGBTQ rights, we're fighting for Black and brown folks. And we know in our community that Black trans women are the most marginalized in our community. We know that they have a life expectancy of 35 years. I met a wonderful activist in South Florida. Her name is Tatiana. She opened a home for Black trans women to be able to come and be safe. So as much energy as we're putting into any of these issues, whether it's just dealing specifically with Black and brown folks or dealing specifically with LGBTQ folks, we have to make sure that we are on the front lines together. And I think that, you know, I'll let Rep. Nixon talk more about the organizing. That is her wheelhouse. But I think that we have to understand that if one of us is being harmed, that we're all being harmed. There is no separation. There is no, well, that's them and I'm going to be okay. Because guess what? Marriage equality is just, it's the floor. It's not the ceiling, right? And you already had a U.S. senator say that the state should decide if interracial marriage should be legal. So if we're going to talk about that, of heterosexual interracial marriage be legal and it should go back to the states, basically saying Loving v. Virginia should not even be the federal law. What do y'all think they're going to do about us? Like, what do y'all think is really going to happen? And so I think that we have to really understand, especially in the time that we're in, these rights that we hold on to, these things that we say, well, this is what we have and we're fine. They're very fragile. And if we don't get busy about electing folks that are going to be representative of our people, our very lives are at stake. That's not hyperbolic. That is the truth. Our very lives are at stake. You have seen the governor and other Republican leaders basically incite violence with this type of legislation. So I think that we have to get busy about working together. I appreciate y'all so much for having me on. So sorry I've got to hop, but I love my friends.
Appreciate your participation. Thank you very much.
All right,
Senator
care.
Jones, I want to fold you in here.
Yeah.
This conversation about the Woke Act.
And I appreciate that, and I actually just want to piggyback off of something that Rep. Rayner just made mention of, and just actually to spin off from your question. When you look at the history of the LGBTQ community and the history of the Black community, I think it's important for us to, and not from the based off the question, but how do we move forward? And that is making sure that we're careful not to pull out the measuring stick on whose struggle was the worst, right? Because I think that puts us in a very peculiar situation because none of it should have happened in the beginning, right? And I believe that whether it was Stonewall, whether it was the Civil Rights Movement, both of them were valid in the fight, right? What we're seeing right now is that you have white Republicans recognize that the browning of America is real. And because the browning of America is real, they have begun to combine the struggle of the LGBTQ community into the same fold. I have to lift up Stephen in this moment because there is a void nationally in the LGBTQ fight where it's become a white-only fight. But in Florida, where I recognize, like for the LGBTQ Democratic Caucus, Stephen is intentional in making sure Black voices are included. Hispanic voices are included. Trans voices are included. So the only way we change and become more intentional about being inclusive is ensuring that that it's not about whose fight is the worst. It's more of how can we move forward together and in ensuring that we're included. The Stop the Woke Act and the Don't Say Gay bill should have never gone separate in the fight, right? It should have always been, we're fighting on both fronts, on both causes, for our Black brothers and sisters and for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. Yeah, it should have been a fight that has happened
completely
together.
Clear in that intersection. We're going to be able to come back to this in some summary, but I do want to push on to a third major issue related to this legislative session. No discussion of the Florida legislative session of 2023 would be complete without a discussion on Disney. It's a fascinating study. Frankly, it's just fascinating. Here is the timeline on Disney and this Florida session. And maybe there's something to be learned here in terms of how protest and corporate implementation might work. We're going to show you a slide. First, on March 2nd, 2022, Disney's CEO Bob Chapek said about Don't Say Gay that he, quote, does not bring any partisan agenda to work. He was basically saying, nope, count me out. There was a dramatic opposition to Disney's stance by activists, shareholders, Disney family members, students, and more. Protest at the Magic Kingdom gate took place. Then employees became vocal and organized walkouts, both in Florida and in California. Disney then apologized, but they couldn't stop the avalanche that had begun. And you could make the argument that it was the largest single-month LGBTQ plus rights position swing in corporate history. Because, now we show you, on March 28, 2022, just 26 days after Bob Chapek, CEO at Disney, he said in a statement, after he said, we ain't getting involved, comments, the Disney Corporation said, quote, our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed by the legislature or struck down in the courts. And we remain committed, and by the way, we're adding what the Today Show didn't report on this morning. We remain committed to supporting the national and state organizations working to achieve that. We are dedicated to standing up for the rights and safety of LGBTQ plus members of the Disney family, as well as the LGBTQ plus community in Florida and across our country, end quote. My goodness, breathtaking. Governor DeSantis then criticizes the largest single employer in Florida and says Disney doesn't side with parents or children, seems to be back to that history thing we've talked about, and that they are you ready, a woke corporation. Disney is woke. What's going on at Disney, and how can we learn from this in terms of our advocacy of what happened in this legislative session? What do y'all think?
Can we also say that Disney's president said that this law should have never passed, okay? And of course, everybody at this table and everybody on this panel says, okay, where was that verbiage before it passed? Where were you there when we needed you to stand with us and for us, okay? But the reality is that now they're trying to show up in their way. Is it too little, too late? Depends on who you ask. You know, we've got to also be able to allow people to make mistakes and try to come through and make them right. And I think that maybe is the direction that Disney's going in.
Well, I agree with you. You know, look, Disney was wrong. They admitted they were wrong. Now, they may have only admitted they were wrong because of the incredible pressure, and it wasn't just here in Florida. It was around the country. It was out of their other affiliated organizations, their studios out of Hollywood, their employees, actors. Everyone realized just what a force Disney is. And of course, we know what a force Disney is here in Florida as the largest employer. So good for them for reversing course, however it happened. Mm-hmm. I've said that we stand ready to work with Disney in any way possible to help them figure out where they need to go and what they want to be doing. The fact that they got caught between now the DeSantis administration and the governor and the Republicans in the legislature on this bill, and everyone else lets you know that there's a huge gap there. I don't know how they're going to thread that needle. They need to come down on the side somewhere. And maybe our friends and our legislative friends knew where they were in the legislative process on this bill to help guide that discussion. But I think that Disney doesn't like being under the microscope. They found themselves under a huge microscope, and now they're trying to figure a way out.
Well, let me ask it point blank. How do they thread this needle? How does Disney accomplish what they've said? We are absolutely committed and will work to overturn this law against the LGBTQ community. And they take it a step farther, which I think is important, and why I contrast what we've just done versus what NBC did this morning. Disney goes a step farther to say we're not only going to work to repeal or have a court overturn it, but we are standing united to LGBTQ organizations that are designed to do this. So theoretically, that means representatives in our state House and Senate. It means organizations like the LGBTQ Democratic Caucus. It means organizations that support Nikki Fried's representation through Nathan. It means Equality Florida. It means. That was a very specific observation that they made. They didn't have to say that. We want to repeal this, and they could have stopped. They didn't do that. What do we learn from the possibilities of the positives of the future in how we made them wobble in 28 days?
I think corporations like Disney, who are so credible, when you see this type of stuff on the surface, you can't show up when the pressure's on, right? And I think that, and I shared this with the leaders at Disney right now, as they are reevaluating how things happen. When you saw this, your clientele of people. You should have come out at the onset and doing it. Now, what I can say is that what happened in the House and what happened in the Senate when it comes to negotiation, they happened at two different times. I don't know how they negotiate in the House, but what I do know in the Senate, when the amendment came, my amendment, Senator Brandis's amendment, we spent the entire weekend on the phone with Disney working through them calling legislators to try to get them on board with this, and B, what does this language look like, even to the point to even reaching out to the governor's office. But if we wouldn't have had to do that if when it got to the House at the beginning, they would have used that same energy to do that. I don't think we would be here right now.
Yeah. Right. Does that mean, in terms of the explanation, very clear summary for me, does that mean going forward the Disney won't fall asleep at the switch again? Would you reasonably go, no, we've created an ally for LGBT Florida that probably is unshakable now?
I want to be careful in saying that, because Florida's politics is fickle, even with the corporations. I've been in this for 11 years now, so I don't want to lay my life on the line like that. But what I will say is that I'm hoping that Disney will see this as a teachable moment. On there.
Okay.
And
I'm curious.
So here's what I think is very important.
I'm going to come to you. You're in Central Florida. What do you think about this Disney conversation?
It's very interesting, that is for sure. Listen, I think that it's important to acknowledge that when it comes to big advocacy moments like this and trying to get corporations and others to stand on the right side, everyone has a lane. Everyone has a lane. There are people that need to be making demands. They need to be very vocal. They need to be doing walkouts. They need to be doing protests. They need to be criticizing those who are either not speaking up or not speaking up forcefully enough. And there are folks who also need to be making a different set of demands. I think right now, where we are is that, well, certainly Disney got itself in this position because their opposition was too little, too late, and they should have known their own staff and their own company well enough to know that if they did not take a position, the CEO's position, oh, we don't get involved in partisan politics. Oh, I'm so sorry, we can't be bothered with this, is naive at best. And it's certainly a reckless way to manage a giant corporation like Disney's at its worst, certainly. But here's where we are. I think that now that the bill is passed, with Disney being the largest private or single employer in the state of Florida that has substantial influence, not just Florida, but around the country and around the world, they need to commit to helping overturn the Don't Say Gay law, whether it be through legislative repeal, which is unlikely, or more importantly, through litigation. And what I mean is not a statement saying, oh, we support the lawsuit to overturn Don't Say Gay. No, no. Disney needs to be committed to helping to fund the litigation to overturn Don't Say Gay and any other legislative proposal that passes into law in any other state. They also need to commit to mitigating any potential harm that comes to LGBTQ youth in Florida as a result of this bill. And yes, have they pledged to freeze political spending? Yes, we know that. That sounds familiar. Publix did the same thing after Parkland. And then when the glare of the spotlight of public scrutiny and the media went away, Disney quietly reinstated their political giving and made no changes. Disney needs to commit to stop making contributions to Governor Ron DeSantis' re-election campaign and his future ambitions, not in the next couple of months, not in this cycle, forever. And they also need to commit to stop funding candidates like Representative Joe Harding, who is the sponsor of this legislation, Senator Dennis Baxley, and retiring State Senator Kelly Stargell, who also plays a direct hand in this bill, forever. Never give them money, ever again. Never give money to their PAC. That needs to be a pledge that is made.
I'm curious to all of you, another very common conversation that's going on in LGBTQ Florida is anger with Disney and not finding a way to forgive or give them an off-ramp of the positive things that have happened in recent days. Anybody want to weigh in on the fact of forgiveness for Disney from LGBT? Anybody have any comments on it? Or we're just very silent. Okay, well that's all right.
I do. I'll just close with this, and this is my personal opinion. Take it for what it's worth. A boycott of Disney does not help the LGBTQ workers who are at Disney that we stand in solidarity with. It doesn't help those folks who are there who work for the giant corporation, who might not be making what they need to be making or getting the benefits that they need to put food on the table. I think that there is absolutely a place where folks can welcome Disney back, but we have to remember that Disney is not the enemy. They are not the reason that the Don't Say Gay bill passed into law. The reason it passed into law is because Governor Ron DeSantis signed it, and because Republicans in the legislature pushed the bill when it was totally unnecessary. They are to blame. They are the ones who need to be held accountable.
Right. Well, we will continue to see if Disney is the happiest place on earth as we go forward. No exploration of this Florida legislative session would be complete without hearing from a student perspective, and we're going to do that now. Joining the conversation is Max Fenning. He is president of the Florida LGBTQ youth organization, PRISM. The grassroots organization fights for LGBTQ student voices here in South Florida. And Max spoke in Tallahassee during the session and has participated in countless state and national media interviews. Max is also an anchor at Queer News Tonight. And we did a historic student takeover of all of our anchor seats for 2 of our episodes of Queer News Tonight. Good evening, Max.
Happy to be here, as always.
Well, Max, tell us a little bit of your perspective on this legislative session, and from your seat as a student and PRISM and students that are part of your organization, tell us about your impressions of what you watched.
Yeah, so as soon as this passed in its first House committee, we were on the ground in this fight. The name of Prism's game really is LGBT inclusive education, and so that was a big part of what we were doing, is educating on what this means, and then personally going up to Tallahassee 3 times. In all in slightly different capacities to, voice our opposition to this legislation and its impact that it will inevitably have on LGBT.
We watched and reported at Queer News Tonight. We reported and showed the protest at the gates at Disney. We showed the hearings in Tallahassee and students' participation. And especially we were moved by the student protests, the plane that flew the banner here in South Florida, and especially at schools like Winter Park High School. And they're chanting "Say Gay" as hundreds and hundreds of students, LGBT and straight allied students. What was your feeling in terms of how students participated in the protests and in the advocacy of what we were watching in this legislative session? How do you think students did?
So I think that this is really a testament to the impact that digital spaces have on young people and the way in which they engage politically. The reason that we're able to see this sort of unified voice among young LGBT people and this sort of grassroots activism among young people is because they're able to organize in a digital space first and be able to educate themselves in a digital space in organizing those sorts of actions on the ground. And that makes that sort of advocacy so much more impactful with that sort of digital know-how and that sort of other arena in which young people are organizing.
I'm curious, Max, for all intents and purposes, let me try to put a fine point on it. We lost. We lost Don't Say Gay. We lost Stop Woke. Sitting today representing PRISM and students and other young voices, LGBTQ young voices in Florida, do you have hope that things are going to get better, or are you discouraged?
It's obviously a hard loss, and it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to acknowledge that this is a loss. But I honestly wouldn't really call it a loss because this fight still continues. We know that there's inevitably going to be litigation that comes out of this. We know that. That there's obviously we're in an election year, and there's some hope on that end, and seeing how young people show up to the polls the way that they showed up to on their school campuses. And I think our biggest battle right now is making sure that we are squashing misinformation, and that's the biggest thing that I have seen, especially in that digital space, is the way in which disinformation has taken hold, especially since our dearest Christina Pouchard decided to make her comments calling LGBT people groomers, which obviously the LGBT community has heard well before I was even alive. And I think that that's super important. I know that some of the biggest disinformation that we've heard is that we haven't read the bill. So I will say right now, classroom instruction by school personnel, or third, next line, parties on gender, on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur, next line, in kindergarten through grade 3 in a manner that is not age, next line, appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in, next line, accordance with state standards. It's lines 97 to 101. For the record, it is nowhere around me. I've memorized it. It's ingrained into my retinas.
Excellent.
And what's even more important is understanding what those words mean. And I think that's a big thing. A lot of people who have come into my social media comments and are like, "You've never read the bill." Some of them might have read the bill, but a lot of them don't actually know what these words mean. Sexual orientation is not sex. They're two different things. And our community is much broader than our sex lives and what we're doing in the bedroom. It's all of that sort of disinformation that we're seeing. It's interesting that I keep getting called a groomer when I'm literally a teenager. And to see that sort of just vulgarity directed at young people because they are in this fight. We started seeing this with Greta Thunberg when we had Donald Trump come for her. And we see this every time that young people come into a politically charged space, that they are treated as less than. They're treated as, they're sort of looked down upon, and they're not recognized for the
Yeah, it's
power.
very
and strength that
interesting,
they
and
have.
you're exactly who are designed, these bills are designed to protect, which is interesting. I'm curious, Max, just for my own edification, before any of this started, had you ever even heard of Anita Bryant?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Oh, you had?
Yeah. I mean, PRISM educates on LGBT inclusive education and sexual health resources, and that also includes LGBT history. We do a LGBT History Month campaign on social media every October, I find the quote. It's at least it was a fruit pie. Very, very humorous.
Excellent. And for anybody that questions, Max, being a student, he graciously accepted. This is a very, he's sitting in space across from Senator Shevrin Jones, the first LGBTQ senator in history in Florida. So it was a very nerve-wracking thing for him. But to prove that he is a student, he agreed to come and participate in our panel about the legislative session. But he made it clear, and we provided some space for him to do it, he had to take an online test.
Yes. I will say, I got a 93, which I'm very happy about, and yeah, so we're all good.
Exactly. All right, and before we end with, from a student perspective, we have multiple representatives and y'all at the panel. Any observations of what you saw from students through the process of the legislative session?
I'll tell you that Max and the others who came to our offices, I was moved to tears. And I'll be honest with you, every time I'm asked right now about my thoughts about the Don't Say Gay bill, I move myself out of that equation because, and I lead with, I'll be fine. It's the young people who came to my office. It was the young people who were out in the hallway who brought me to tears because it reminded me that I didn't have that fight in me when I was a 16, 17-year-old because I was in my own little closet. But when you have students like Max and others who so boldly come to your office and say, fight for me, that means something.
Yeah.
And I want to know, just to direct this specifically at Shevrin Jones, is, we came into that building, and this was my first time even being in Tallahassee, point blank period, for any reason.
Oh, you had never been to Tallahassee before?
No, not in or out of the Capitol building, nowhere near Tallahassee. And
generally, that's a good thing.
I would say so. But, we came into there and you could feel the hostility. You could feel this sort of energy that we were sort of fruit flies flying around a house plant that they wanted to sort of shoo out whatever opportunity that they got, which is why it was even more freeing to be able to rally in the rotunda and chant and everything. But coming into the offices of people like Shevrin Jones it was like this airlock closes and all of that hostility is sort of left out into those main spaces of the Capitol building, and it's just this serene, peaceful feeling of I'm in an affirming space now, and I'm in a space where I feel welcome in my own state's capital.
Yeah, I don't know if we still have Representative Guillermo Smith or Representative Nixon. We do. Any observations from y'all about what you saw from the student perspective this legislative session?
I was so motivated. It was not just the students who were staging walkouts and protests in schools across Central Florida, across the state of Florida, even outside of Florida and other parts of the country. But also so many of the students who were even in the Capitol building. I mean, we have a page and messenger program in the House of Representatives with students from schools around the state. And I had pages who came to me and handed me personally written notes that talked about how important they saw our advocacy in standing up against the Don't Say Gay bill was. They said things like that our speeches and our debates and the way that we opposed the bill didn't just give them inspiration, but it gave them hope for their own future as a queer student and as a queer person. And so I would just remind folks, it doesn't even matter if you're an elected official. You don't have to be an elected official to be an out, proud LGBTQ person who provides inspiration to young people. I mean, in the context of the LGBTQ caucus in the legislature, which is myself, Rep. Rayner, and Senator Jones, sure, we lost the legislative battle, but the way that we came forward to tell our stories from our own queer perspective, based on what I've heard from young people, gave those kids hope. And I think that that's really important, even in the context that we lost the legislative battle.
Yeah, hope is definitely important. And Representative Nixon, any thoughts from you about, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And Nathan, I know you were going to jump in.
Oh, so a couple of things. And I'll highlight a great moment Senator Jones provided for some of the students that came up. I was up there almost every week, and our department often welcomes lots of student groups, lots of different groups, business groups, chambers, leadership programs. And the senator had created an opportunity for some of the students to go on the floor of the Senate, which, oddly enough, I hadn't done since I was a high schooler coming up doing speech and debate. And there was this moment then and with a different group when they came into our office and we sat down and we had a little conversation about what our department does. The engagement and just the excitement and the awe, there were lots of students, it was their first time ever in the Capitol, and it was as though why they were there was gone for just a minute, and there was just like, wow, this is really cool. And we, as you were joking, you don't want folks to go to Tallahassee. I would disagree in my position, and I think some of our electeds might also disagree. We absolutely want them to go to Tallahassee. I want them to feel inspired that we are there. And there aren't that many trans folks working at the Capitol, out trans folks that we know about. And that was also a very unique experience to listen to the rhetoric in committee and on the floor talk about our experiences, much less our bodies, in ways that was abhorrent and triggering and traumatizing. So that beautiful moment with those students being so excited, like when we were 10 or 11 and did the first thing that was exciting, I hope they hold on to that.
And
yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Point. I mean,
part of that.
I had the pleasure of being in both of those groups. I had a pleasure of being, one of those students that Shevrin Jones, I got to take a picture and I got to be in like the center point where you sound really loud and all this other stuff and to be able to go into the Division of Agriculture and Consumer Services as well and that sort of experience and Nate, I've known Nathan previously. Obviously, we've both been on Queer News Tonight together and to be able to have that friendly face as well. It was this moment, like Nathan said, it was this moment where we get the opportunity to not be looked at with that sort of hostility of being looked at like how Donald Trump looks at Greta Thunberg. We get to be looked at like we're kids on a field trip, and we get to see this real awesome skyscraper-sized building with awesome architecture and with and all of these other things, and for a moment we get the brief moment of solace to forget that the people and a significant amount of the people in this building are trying to take away our rights.
I'm curious, Max, with that observation, for you and PRISM and other students, last question, that went to Tallahassee, had this experience of really, literally being in the trenches. When you have the opportunity to meet people like the secretary or the commissioner's office or Senator Jones' office or other representatives and different people in Tallahassee, do you think the young attitude among LGBT is that when we get to their age, we're going to do it better? Do you think about that at all?
I think that there is this perception that we are now tasked with fixing a lot of problems that were created by the people who came before us, and it's this unfortunate situation that we're in. across multiple things beyond LGBT rights. But I think that I value this sort of work that we're able to build off of, especially as someone who has been at the forefront of providing that sort of online education in regards to LGBT history in particular, having that sort of knowledge of the shoulders that I stand on today. And that sort of recognition of, we did not come onto a blank slate here. We are coming after this long, arduous fight that continues today, and we are just another chapter in that, and hopefully a really, really positive one.
I think Max needs to run for something. Wasn't that a perfect political answer? Right?
Wait.
I can't wait either.
I agree. Congratulations to you, Max. And I have to say to you, I follow you very closely and encourage you here at Queer News Tonight and with Prism, et cetera. While many of the stories, the reason why we wanted to do this in talking about the legislative session of many of the chapters, as Max has just said, of this story of the 63 days, one of the highlights were our youth, which were the exact targets of what we watched in this legislative session. And the Larkins at Winter Park High School, and the student in Flagler Palm Coast that hands out pride flags, and the protest with the handmade signs at Walt Disney World. And of course, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that went to Tallahassee to voice up was among the best things that we watched through the legislative session. And Max, I congratulate you for being one of those voices. Thank you very much for participating with us tonight at Queer News Tonight. One last thing that we want to explore is something that isn't talked about a lot in the legislative session. Because after all, the gaslighting of what we watched was, this is all about parental choice. And clearly somebody has polled and thinks that they can win elections on parental choice. So we thought it was appropriate to, after all these bills are written, talking about parents. So to complete our exploration of this Florida legislative session, we wanted to talk to an LGBTQ parent. And this person that we're folding in our conversation had a fantastic morning the other morning on the Today Show, and saw that picture and that beautiful, beautiful child. And that, of course, is Todd Delmay and his husband, Jeff. They were at the forefront of what family and parental rights is all about in Florida. Todd and Jeff were at the forefront of as the plaintiffs during the Florida marriage equality lawsuit that set legal gay marriage in the state. And I make the joke that in our community, many gay men go, oh, I got marriage rights in 2015, poop, I'm done. Now I say that kind of lightly, but we're talking to Todd Delmay, who was the living embodiment of what was really at stake. And they are parents. Todd is president of the Hollywood LGBTQ Council, a city that, by the way, congratulations, has a historic first ever 100% HRC score, Hollywood, Florida. And he's president of the first ever Hollywood Pride, which Faye and I hung out at and had a great time. He is also, by the way, a candidate for the Florida House. Welcome, Todd Delmay, to Queer News Tonight. Todd, tell us a little bit from your perspective, especially the focus of being a parent, like what you said at the Today Show, what you've watched in these 63 days of legislative session in Florida. What do you come away with?
Well, the first thing I thought of when I saw the bill was my son. Actually, when I testified in the House and a little bit in the Senate, talked about when he was little. Just like every child, he was invited to bring in a picture of his family and to be able to talk about his family. And he was warmly accepted. He was in a safe space. His teachers talked about his family and accepted him like everyone else. And my concern was that with this kind of legislation, that he would not be able to talk about his family. And so we've been very vocal, like you said. We've been speaking out at every opportunity about it. I think in some ways they did not expect a parent's point of view. I think they have a very narrow view of what it means to be LGBTQ, and to have a parent step up, I think, surprised some people. But we are more and more in our society, we are finding more and more people who are becoming parents. It wasn't necessarily an option when we were kids. Growing up, we never had that example to be able to see that it was possible to get married and to have kids. So I think, as society has changed and they are starting to see how marriage equality is changing the landscape of our community, and I think they're doing everything they can to fight back against us.
Todd, forgive me, because I know it's a tough question, but when Governor DeSantis' press secretary said, if you're in opposition to Don't Say Gay, you're essentially a groomer, blows the dog whistle that essentially you're a pedophile. And you are in a married relationship, historic relationship in Florida, because you set the groundwork of the legal framing for marriage overturn in Florida, with a child. And that attack must have been so deeply personal, because it says something about what they think you are. What's your reaction when you saw her comments about grooming?
Well, it's not entirely unexpected. They had the same arguments during the Johns Commission in the 1950s. Anita Bryant had the same kind of argument that we had to save our children, as if there is something nefarious happening to children by LGBTQ plus people. It was the reason why they actually wrote into Florida law that you could not adopt if you were, as they use the term, homosexual. So this just seemed part and parcel of the same thing. When you go after someone's child and you make them fearful of what might happen to their child when their child is not in their own personal control, it gets at you. Every time my son gets on the bus to go to school, every time he goes to a friend's house to play, every time he's out of my sight, I'm always wondering about his safety. And so to prey on that with parents and tell them that there is something dangerous happening to their child when they are not in the room is frightening, and it will get parents to react. What I was particularly upset about is the naming of this bill, the parental rights in education, because clearly it's designed and targeted for only a certain set of parents. When you look at a majority of parents that are accepting of LGBTQ plus people and of LGBTQ plus families, it simply does not represent everyone, right? And so this very small vocal minority that now has not only been told that their point of view is more important than everyone else's, but they've been given this penalty that is in the law to become vigilantes and to go after school boards and teachers, and to do so in a manner that I think really puts at risk school boards' budgets, teachers' lesson plans, and I think there is a lot of concern. We were just, in fact, meeting with our teacher and sort of the team that works with my son and talking about his individual education plan. And they're already thinking how this might affect him. Now, they will personally do everything that they can to support him and to provide love for him. They've known him since he was in kindergarten. But not every child will have that opportunity. There will be some school boards that will go to the farthest extent that they can in interpreting what exactly this bill means to them. And it could be a legal free-for-all for a lot of parents who simply want to find an excuse to sue.
And Todd, I'm curious, as a parent and framing exactly as you've said, this is gaslighted in a way to say this is designed for parental rights and choices to protect children, and neither one of those things are likely true, as argued out through the 63 days of legislative session. I'm curious about how your child has reacted to this, because clearly, I know, having met him, he's been in this studio. I remember clearly how nervous he was in this studio. Going through this process and hearing so much, you can't turn on a television without it, whether it be local or state or national. You can't get away from it. What is the reaction of your son through this process?
Well, we've always been very honest with our son. We knew from the very beginning that our family was different. We're an interracial couple, we're a gay couple, and we've been very open and honest with him from the very beginning. And even throughout marriage equality, even though he was very young, we were explaining to him what exactly it meant that we were fighting for. And so it was the same here. We told him what the bill was, why I was going to Tallahassee, why I was working so hard to fight against it. And after the Senate passed it and I went home and I saw him the next morning when he got up, he asked me, he said, so what happened? And I said, well, it passed. And the first thing that he said to me was, am I going to be able to talk about my family? He understood the weight and the importance of it. It was very personal for him. And, you know, we tried to reassure him that there are many people who are working to try and right this wrong. We know that there is a lawsuit that's about to be filed, that there are other families like ours with small children who are going to be joining and becoming plaintiff couples, just like we did for marriage equality. And so he understands that this is not just his fight, it's not just our family's fight, it's a part of what we do. Many of these families, the other families we fought with marriage equality, some of the families actually that are going to be part of the lawsuit are friends of his. So he understands the sense of community, and that for us is, I think, really the most important takeaway here is that this is a community effort. We must come together. We must fight all of these things together. We can't let them defeat us. We can't let them discourage us. And we have to make sure that we are always keeping our eyes on the prize.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Todd, we appreciate you being here with us at Queer News tonight. We know you've had a very busy evening. It's interesting to me that you represent exactly what the bill's intent was named for. That's what you represent. Right. You're the parent that the bill is talking about, but it's really not talking about you, right, or your child. Which is what's so sad about what we have watched through this legislative session. But thank you for being with us. Well, we indicate to you that the conversation tonight has been incredible and so helpful to help us understand this Florida legislative session. What happened, why, and most importantly, let's have some final thoughts on what's next for Florida and the LGBTQ community. I ask all of y'all, what's next? What are we going to do next? All right, these are all facts. What's next? Anybody have any magic wands first off?
Well, I'll go. Thank you, Al, for that question, and thanks for hosting this tonight. What I think is next for our community here in Florida is a continued organizing effort coming out of what we've just seen with this legislative session. I think we'll see more conjoined efforts. I think we'll have more youth and more young people involved with us, and I think we'll be an even more impactful part of the 2022 election cycle. We were 6% of the electorate in Florida in 2020. Our people showed up and showed out, and I think we'll see that again because people are energized.
Do you agree with that, Nathan?
I do, but I think as we do the work, I think we're going to need to also be intentional and include those that are typically silent in the work. We talked about this earlier, and I think in this conversation the T has been overshadowed by other critical issues, but not always allowed to be as vocal as they should be. I think you can look at the comments specifically at the governor's presser when signing this bill. You know, the comments about what's coming is about this, you know, supposed radical gender liberal ideology. And I expect there to be more coming in next session. We're seeing what is probably going to come in other states' legislative sessions right now. And if as a community we're going to fight collectively together as a unified front, then I think we need to really invest in understanding the needs of the most marginalized, which means looking at the trans community and at Black and brown community members and saying, what do you need? Because my other concern, frankly, right now, between now and the election, which is critically important, a big part of my work is around getting folks to resources. We have folks that are hurting coming out of COVID disproportionately in our state because they're LGBTQ. Those statistics have come from DC.
Just to eat or have housing.
Just to eat and have housing. That's not going to change. And we talk about the violence community members face. Florida has consistently led in the reported murders of trans women year after year after year. So the reality of this political climate, when we look at the impacts today, right now, I'm worried about communities struggling. And
you know, it's such an amazing observation, because one of the things that the othering that is going on, you're not me, you're the other, and to create an enemy creates this philosophy, which is we are going to discriminate against you, and we're not going to provide food or housing resources or health care and ultimately, all of those negatives lead to violence.
Yes, and Senator Jones said it beautifully. They have said out loud this session, what we've known, and they said it repeatedly. So if we're not clear, replay the remarks in committee and on the House and Senate floor.
Sure.
And that's
Michelle
what's
Rayner's comments tonight are electrifying to me. We are literally talking about our lives, literally.
Yes.
And you just point that out, because banging a drum loudly, like what Donald Trump did for 4 years, you bang that drum, and eventually people are going to follow you and fulfill what you're trying to bang the drum for. And that's what this legislative session does. Faye, final thoughts about where we're going?
We've got to keep the momentum going. We've got to keep on going. You know, yes, this bill is now a law. All right. Now, where do we go from here? Who knows? But we need to continue to unify, continue to fight. Tomorrow's Trans Visibility Day. Let's stand with our T. You know, because in our own group, in our own LGBTQIA, we're not completely unified as we should. If we were to unify tomorrow, trust me, they couldn't stand against us.
Yeah. Well, it's always important to frame groundbreaking conversations like this on the interest from the LGBTQ community. And I think we've all just said that in different ways. Happening Out Television Network has partnered with a democracy project to encourage our community to get out and get involved. It's called Without You, We Lose. We want to show you a sample. Watch this.
Hi everybody, Chris Caputo here, City Commissioner in Wilton Manors. I support the Florida LGBTQ Democratic Caucus in stopping what we are watching in our state. It is truly tragic. Our students and teachers, they are under attack. The rejection of the transgender community, rejection of LGBTQ+ by limiting our First Amendment free speech rights, by suggesting don't say gay, this has got to stop. It begins with you and me. You need to register to vote, take action, vote, and remember, without you, we lose.
As the New York Times put it, found he could get more attention from the party, from the public, and from the president at the time by hitching himself to Trumpism.
Let me just say, Mr. President, welcome home to Florida.
I really appreciate the kind words from the president.
But let me tell you about the president. I want to thank him for his support. I want to thank him for entrusting me.
First of all, I think the trial is stupid. I think it's counterproductive. We already have a flaming fire in this country, and it's like taking a bunch of gasoline and pouring it on top of the fire. Second, and I look back at the time, for example, Richard Nixon, who had clearly committed crimes and wrongdoing. And in hindsight, I think we would all agree that President Ford's pardon was important for the country to be able to move forward. And history held Richard Nixon quite accountable for what he did as a result.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part. Make America great again.
And the White House clearly leaning into this fight as well. Today, Biden's press secretary went right at the Florida governor and his campaign for, among other things, selling T-shirts saying things like, "Don't Fauci my Florida."
Not only is Governor DeSantis not abiding by public health decisions, he's fundraising off of this.
Without you, we lose. Finally, we encourage the entire LGBTQ+ community to get involved in these vital issues that we've discussed tonight. In late July, the Florida LGBTQ+ Democratic Caucus will hold an educational 3-day summit conference. The program will include hotel accommodations, social events, and most important of all, educational programs vital for the LGBTQ+ community. We are happy to announce that Happening Out Television Network will be a presenting sponsor. And the 3-day event will be held, yay, right here in Fort Lauderdale. You can get information by going now to lgbtqdems.com. Sign up, get newsletters.
.org.
Oh, .org. Oh, sorry about that. .org. We hope you can attend. Well, that is it, our special broadcast of Queer News tonight. We hope you will share this live broadcast We hope you think the issues are important to the LGBTQ plus community. Queer News Tonight is the world's only live LGBTQ evening news daily at 8 p.m. We are the world's only LGBTQ plus media platform to bring you a program like this in motion and sound. This was all live. And that is the passion of the Happening Out television network. Tonight was a dream team of some of the best LGBTQ plus and ally voices in Florida, standing up for the entire LGBTQ plus community. These are dark days, but we do have hope. We remind you, Queer News Tonight stands with Ukraine, and we are strong for our LGBTQ students that need us to stand with them now. Good night. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out television network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.